And let me know you're out there. Oh, shucks. That was a recording. So if you can, let me know you're out there by saying hi in the chat, maybe where you are logging in from. I'll take a couple of seconds to do that. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Native Languageness. If you could, in the chat, please let me know you're out there by saying hi, good morning, good afternoon, where you are joining us from, maybe how you're feeling, how's your day going. And then we'll get started in just a bit. Hey, aloha, Susan. Nice to see you again. Hi, Teresa. Hello, everyone. Again, we are just waiting till everyone gets in. If you, while you join, could you just maybe get on the chat and say hi? Um, Let me know where you are joining us from, as well as maybe how the weather is. Hi, Holly. Boy, we got the Alaska in the house. Hey, Andy. Aloha. We're gonna wait just a little bit. Let everybody come in. I know there was some really good sessions going on that ran a little bit over. So I'm guessing people are, stretching a little bit and getting another glass of water or coffee. So we'll just wait a little bit and then we'll get started. We have from Arizona, New Mexico. Welcome. Hi, Alana. Nice to see you again. Okay. There's a couple more people coming in. Let's just wait a sec and let everybody get their audio on. And then we'll get started. I hope everybody is having a wonderful day, that your sessions have been going well. I wanted to, I know, we've been um, online for quite a bit today. I know some of you are starting midday, and so maybe you've been on your computer, doing your work, uh, and then you're jumping into these to the project directors meeting. So maybe you've had, quite some time to be online. And so I don't know if any of you joined yesterday, but I did have a session about online learning fatigue. And so I shared a bunch of strategies that you could use to help students and staff not have online learning fatigue. And so we're going to do one of those strategies now, just to sort of maybe relax our mind, give us some space, maybe some downtime. And I'm going to share this with you before we actually get started. But before I do that, sorry, I do want to again let you know that you are joining the Languageness Native Language and Our Youngest Learner session. And I want to get this clean before I go to the headspace.
This presentation was produced under U.S. Department of Education contract number GS00F115CA with Synergy Enterprises, Inc. The views expressed herein do not necessarily represent the positions or policies of the U.S. Department of Education. No official endorsement by the U.S. Department of Education of any product, commodity, service, or enterprise mentioned herein is intended or should be inferred.
Okay, now that we've got this claim, let's just take a few minutes to look at this resource of Headspace. And so let's go ahead and just relax our minds, and I'll play this mindfulness exercise. I hope you enjoy, and then we'll get into the content.
The danger of holding on too tightly to a particular opinion or belief is that in order to do so, we have to limit the mind. But a curious mind, an inquiring mind, knows that its potential is limitless. So as we travel through life, as we accumulate lots of conditioning along the way, we tend to create a world where actually our opinions and beliefs are quite fixed. They can change, and we might like to think that we're very open to changing our opinions and beliefs. But more often than not, even if it's just habit, we tend to sort of fall into a particular pattern of thinking. And as soon as we adopt one side and we're very attached to that one side, then we've kind of shut off the other side. We've set ourselves up in opposition. So at very kind of worst, we don't really see the other side. We don't hear the other side. But we could even sort of perhaps start to experience a bit of conflict as well, whether it's in our own mind, in our own dialogue, or whether it's external with another person, another community, another country, whatever it might be. So it's only really when we are willing. It doesn't mean that we have to give up our beliefs, that we have to let go of our opinions forever. More that we show up in each moment with a fresh, curious, interested mind, willing to listen, knowing that possibly everything that we've ever believed, everything we ever thought, perhaps that's not true. And if we can maintain that freshness of mind, or beginner's mind, as is often talked about in meditation, then at the very least, we create a space where the mind can absorb, can respect the way other people think. And all of a sudden, we start to see not only a transformation in our own mind, greater sense of calm, of clarity, but also a change in our relationships. People understanding that we're willing to listen. It's probably the biggest thing that we can offer somebody else, allowing them to be who they are in the moment. It doesn't mean that we have to change. It doesn't mean that we have to necessarily give up our opinions or beliefs, but being willing to be open, knowing that the world is bigger than that, is perhaps one of the most important parts of training the mind. So just making sure that you're sitting comfortably, that you're not going to be disturbed in any way. Just beginning by taking a few big deep breaths, breathing in through the nose and out through the mouth. And with the next out breath, closing the eyes, just feeling the weight of the body press down. Aware of that point of contact. Feeling the weight of the arms, the hands, and the weight of the legs and the feet just pressing down into the floor. And at the same time, just becoming more familiar with the space around you, just settling back into the different sounds. Not thinking about them, just noticing as they come and go. And at the same time, noticing how the body feels right now. And starting at the top of the head, just gently scanning down through the body. Not stopping in any one place. Evenly scanning all the way down towards the toes. Just building up a picture of how the body feels. So you probably already noticed that movement of breath in the body. That rising and falling sensation. Just noticing where in the body you feel that movement. Noticing the rhythm of the breath without changing it in any way at all. And just resting the mind on that sensation. The only thing you need to remember is if at any stage the mind gets distracted, in realizing that distraction, just letting it go and gently bringing the attention back to that movement again. And remember, you can count the breaths as they pass if you find that easier. And gently bringing the attention back to the breath each time. And as you begin to let go of any focus on the breath, just starting to become more aware, that feeling of contact, the weight of the body, more aware of the space around you, any sounds. And then when you're ready, just opening the eyes again.
Awesome. That was awesome. Okay, we sort of readjust, get ourselves ready and settled in. I'm going to share our back to our presentation screen. Again, Headspace has a whole bunch of resources, even for little guys. Teachers can access that resource for free. I know all of you are working in trying to perpetuate and maintain your native languages, whether you're working with professionals or, as for our presenters in this presentation, working with our youngest learners. This is a great way to sort of settle our mind and give ourselves some space to just sort of take care of ourselves. If I haven't met you yet, my name is Olani Lilly. I am a Senior Technical Assistance Associate with Synergy Enterprises Incorporated. I get to work on the OIE Technical Assistance team, and I have the blessing of being able to work with all of you folks across Native American and Alaska Native communities. And now I'll let our two presenters introduce themselves.
Siguli, yegong sioni Kaylee Hunyani he ne to Tehadiwanakwa, Nikanjo Koda, Nene Ungoho Nehani Gajina Koda. So hello everyone, I'm Yegong C or Rosa Frankor, and I am a immersion instructor in the Tehadiwanakwa Languageness. And I'll let my colleague introduce herself.
Saguli Sagwig. My name is Priscilla Belisle. I also work with the Tehediwanekwa Languageness, but more in administrative capacity with project coordination, project management, grants management, things like that. So I kind of work behind the scenes to help the program run smoothly.
Awesome. Thank you, ladies. We look forward to your presentation of your program. Today in our session today, what we're going to do is we're going to learn about the Oneida Nation language revitalization efforts. Sorry, tongue-tied. Also understand best practices in teaching and learning Indigenous language. And then understanding the Oneida language education programs efforts for children and adults. Here are some of the, when you look across Languageness, it's really rather interesting to see how many nations actually implement the Languageness. Here are some of the key elements that define Languageness. One is that it's either, some begin as early as infant to preschool. It is language immersion. There are always in Languageness family language classes, as well as and oh boy, I'm having a hard time talking, elder engagement. So those are some of the aspects of Languageness. Okay. Here is the history of Native Languageness. I looked all over and was able to research and found out that really some women and families in Samoa and the Cook Islands actually began the first what they would call punana leo. And that was really a group of women who got together in different villages to care for their children and as well as to perpetuate the language. From there, in 1982, again in Aotearoa or New Zealand, the kahangareo began, again focused primarily on preschool age children and definitely language immersion. And then in 1983, in Hawaii, the Aha Punana Leo, there are a few leaders in that movement from the beginning that went down to Aotearoa to see the kahangareo model and then brought that back to Hawaii in 1983. In 1997, the Sami language, also in Finland, began their nativeness, as well as the Seneca language ness in 2009. And in 2018, our presenters, their language program began. All right, so I'll turn it over to our presenters to share their work and their program. Go ahead, ladies.
Hello, everyone. So we will get started. So we want to share some background about our program, how we got started, some of our programming efforts, some immersion instructional techniques, and a little bit of everything in between, as well as some of the administrative areas of starting or working or operating a language nest or an immersion program. All of those things are key for reclaiming, for us, our Oneida language. So it's kind of, this is an overview of kind of our journey, our relational journey of all of us working together to reclaim Unguho'ekne, which is the Oneida language. All right, so for our language, UNESCO classifies the Oneida language as critically endangered. We only have a few functional speakers left in our community. We have a first language speaker and a fluent second language speaker. We have a number of people working towards second language proficiency. And then within our language nest, we're working towards helping our children become proficient first language speakers. We start with students at the age of 3 within that critical, influential period of their development. So what does that mean for us now? It means that we all have a responsibility and play a role in revitalizing our language here in our community. And so for us, we view this as a collective responsibility. Those that may work in other communities, there is very helpful doing it from a communal initiative or working together to achieve such a large task like this. So our program, the Language Nest, operates out of the Oneida Language Department. Our Language Department and our Language Nest both operate out of our school system, the Oneida Nation school system. And the goal of the Language Department is to increase the number of Oneida language speakers in our community. So some of the focus areas are Oneida language immersion programming. So that's our Language Nest and the Language Nest that I work within. The Language Department also provides support and instruction for the school system and the surrounding public schools, as well as the community. The Language Department also creates a lot of resources, works in curriculum development for our language. So we wanted to talk a little bit about the spectrum of Oneida language learning in our community. We have a variety of initiatives within our community. I just briefly talked about the Oneida Language Department. They provide a lot of language resources for the community in terms of classes, curriculums, all of that stuff. And so with all the various programming, it's also kind of important to understand where all the programming or the way in which it's being, the goals of each programming, I guess you could say. So within our language nest, the goal or the way that we educate children is through immersion. In our community, we also have second language acquisitional programming. So it means that the technical instructional medium is within English, but the content is the language. There's also cultural acquisition with language. We have a cultural heritage department within our community, and they administer a lot of that programming. There's some partial immersion. We do teacher training, and I'll talk about that shortly within the Language Nest. That includes some of that in preparation for teachers working in an immersion environment. And then we have our full immersion programming in our community, which is our Language Nest, Language Department adult immersion as well. And then for us in our community, we use this definition of Indigenous language immersion, which I'll read just because it's helpful. If you're familiar with it, great. If not, this will be helpful because it'll kind of give you an idea for what we do within our programming here. Native language immersion is culturally centered and holistic educational programming that uses the target language or the native language. So for us, the Oneida language as the sole medium of instruction. For our community, that means that we teach all content in a culturally centered way using Oneida only with no English. So why immersion? Why do we do immersion in our community? One, I talked about the history of our language. We have very few functional or first language and second language speakers in our community. Our language is also critically endangered, but also there's a lot of benefits to immersion. One, language immersion positively impacts educational achievement. So nationally, students who took foreign languages for 4 years scored statistically higher on standardized tests. Learning more than one language enhances cognitive development and social growth and promotes understanding among diverse people and cultures. So there's a lot of benefits to immersion. The benefits paired with also some of the realizations in our community that our language is in a state of emergency, we need to create more speakers, and that we don't have many speakers left are some of our reasons for why we do what we do, why we have our language nest in our community. So a few more things, we just wanted to add these things because they're really helpful in educating others about why we do immersion. Early childhood immersion in First Nations languages has been linked to higher income, better health, greater social and civic engagement, lifelong access to learning, and less involvement with the justice system. So immersion programs also report that 90% of students graduating and going on to post-secondary education compared to the average rate of 60%. There's also improved retention rates associated with that, better cognitive results across a range of topics as well. So we'll talk about our language nest and get into a lot of the programming here. So Dehadiwanakwa is the name of our language nest, and it means they pick up the word. And there's a couple students pictured throughout all of our presentation here. So our program mission is to reestablish an Oneida language speaking community by actively growing new speakers through language immersion instruction and education with the intent of normalizing the use of the Oneida language within our territory to restore and sustain community wellness and the resurgence of Oneida cultural practices that and traditions founded on the practice of peace, strength, and a good mind. So we'll get into some program information. Our program is currently within its 4th year, actually, of operation. This is our 4th school year. We operate Monday through Friday from 8 to 3. We have 6 immersion teaching staff. We have 3 trainees, actually. 3 trainees. We serve students 3 to 6. We have 2 classrooms. We have a pre-K 3 and 4-year-old classroom, and then we have a combined grades kindergarten and 1, so that's the K1 classroom. We have 2 teachers within each class. They team teach, so we have a lead and a co-lead instructor in each classroom. I'm in the 3 and 4-year-old classroom, so I work with the younger students. We have approximately 18 students enrolled right now, and students receive about 40 hours of immersion instruction per week. And we'll talk a little bit more about assessments. I'm sure we'll probably get a question. We always do get questions about that. We have some culturally centered assessments for students, teachers, and parents. Within our program, we have some goals and objectives that we've created for each group, students, teachers, and parents. For our parents, we work on creating and boosting their cultural engagement or cultural awareness, cultural knowledge of both our language and our culture. For our teachers, we work on increasing their abilities in their teaching skills. So that includes immersion instructional techniques, but also Oneida language proficiency. And then for students, we do anecdotal observations right now for the assessments. It's combined with a little bit of content, but also some proficiency. So that's kind of what we measure for both of those right now. For our program, we're still relatively new, so we do experiment with different assessments at the moment, and we're still kind of trying to find what really fits best for us. And so I would say that that's a work in progress, always within our program. So yeah, I think that's as much as I'll say about that.
One is where you have a video, so I'm going to share a different screen so we can see your video. Let's see. New share. And let me get there. Oh. Okay. Okay, I'm hoping everyone can see that video. And I'll hit play.
Okay, George, back to what do you want to do? What do you want to do? Natikai,
Oh.
Natiwade, Halega Tanuni Kanaga. See going down? Okay, George, back to Natikai.
Let's go.
No?
Let's
Is it no? Natikai?
Let's go. Opa.
Dai?
Who's going?
Dai? Is it no?
Balele.
Ashili. Natiwade. Natiwade, double. Natiwade. Okwa.
Sister and brother's busing.
Natiwade.
When is your bus gonna come?
They're like on it to go on. Not to take. Say dog yet again. Gahagu. Nati, what's that noise you're gonna
It's my turn.
Okay, is in on. In on. Nati quiet.
Yeah, good for good.
That's shady. Can't do it.
What's the other person?
Okay, I was saying is in on. What's that noise you're gonna get? Hey, John, who's follow? Nati quiet.
Let's go.
Is it gonna wait again?
Who's so cool?
You want it up?
Oh, you guys see you can call it soul.
Oh, nice. You got eat? That's a lahan o. Oh, yeah. That's a new you can get on it. That's your need, though. That's cool. Where's? Say goes to her?
Awesome. Let me stop sharing. That was so cute. Let me get out of here and we'll get back to the presentation. It's interesting when you, one of the immersion sort of practices is even if a student speaks to you in English, if you heard that instructor continues in the native language and responds in the native language. Oops. Okay. I'll move on to the next slide. There we go.
Okay, I can talk for a little bit about our program outcomes. So the Hedoanakwa is funded through grants right now. And within our grants, we have several outcomes that we need to work towards, but we also have our own strategic plan that puts us out about 5 years that we're also working towards those outcomes as well. It's really important when you're doing programming, whether it's new, continuing, old programming, to continuously update and work towards outcomes so that you have a way of measuring progress and a way of, for your staff, for your stakeholders, for your community, showing that what you're doing is working towards a common goal down the road. So for the Hedoanakwa Languageness right now, we have several outcomes that we use our assessments for that Yegunsi talked about. But first and foremost, of course, is increasing comprehension of Oneida language and proficiency of the language for both our immersion staff, our trainees, and the students within the program. So we have assessments that are directly related to comprehension and proficiency. We also think it's really important for any type of programming like this to create awareness in the community. In a lot of communities, there's still a lot of misconception about what exactly language immersion is, how it works, and what the long-term outcomes and benefits are. So it's important to continuously engage with your community, with your parents, with your stakeholders to increase awareness not only of the benefits of immersion, but the progress you're making towards your outcomes, and about the state of the language and how the state might be changing as a result of the direct interaction of your program with the students and their parents. We also want to see increased language use within the community, not just within our parents, our students, and our families, but within others in the community as well. It's really important for us to create or to have language be seen as a normal part of our conversation, to normalize the use of language in spaces that are outside of the language nest, in homes, in community places, in our convenience stores, in our tribal buildings and things like that. So our hope is that as our students learn, as our families learn, then they're then using that language more often and in other places, and hopefully it has a domino effect with others in the community, where if they have, they know a few words, maybe they might feel more comfortable using those if they hear others using them as well. We also have a really wonderful partnership with our Oneida Nation High School. So our language nest is in the same building, and we are have a partnership where high school students are able to come and work in the language nest as a part of their high school credit. And then after they graduate, if they have an interest in the language nest, then we can then work with them further to further their immersion teaching skills as well as their language proficiency. And we've actually have two former high school students that are working with us now as immersion trainees as a direct result of that partnership. We can both talk about that.
Yeah.
So just to go through some of our challenges, as with any new programming, there's a lot of lessons to be learned. A really big one that impacted the implementation of the language nest last year was the COVID-19 pandemic, and Yegunsi can talk a little bit more about that, but it really meant we needed to make some changes for that year that because we couldn't meet in person with our students.
So for us last year, we had done school virtually, which was not ideal. It is, for us, definitely more challenging to do immersion virtually, but make it effective. So as Indigenous people, one thing that's critical to our relationships is being a person, being around each other, talking with each other. And so doing immersion through a computer screen was definitely a challenge, but we figured out a way to, I guess, meet the challenge to the best we could. What we had done was we did Facebook Lives daily on our Facebook page. And so with the crazy scheduling and other like parents in our program, they had children in other schools. And so everyone was pretty much virtual, and just the schedule of virtual education was crazy. So we did Facebook Live because it was just archived on the page. And so people could go back and watch it. They didn't have to watch it live, but they could watch it later in the day. And so that was really helpful because a lot of families and parents were able to do that and have their children watch it according to their schedule. But also our community was able to watch it. So that was really nice too, because we would get people that would tune in and they would have a Facebook Live immersion lesson. And so that was really cool. The only thing is, I guess the downside is it was hard to gauge what the effectiveness of that was on the other side of the screen, because we're teaching, but we didn't quite really have an idea of what was happening from the viewer's point of view. So that was kind of one of the challenges, I guess, with that. The same thing with, we also offer parent classes for our parents in the program. We had to do that all virtually as well. We ended up doing and making YouTube videos, and then we would send them the links to watch. But we've gotten some feedback from parents that said again, the engagement is really critical to the success in their learning. It seems that those two things are definitely tied. And so it's hard because if they have a question, they might not be able to ask it, or if definitely something more complex, if they're learning a more complex topic in our language, to kind of understand that through a video is definitely more challenging. So like when we have our classes in person, which is what we were doing before the pandemic, we were able to like answer those questions and walk them through that and things like that. So for students and parents, that was kind of some of the challenges from the pandemic.
Some of our other challenges are listed here, but one of our major issues that we've been working diligently towards resolving is funding, and that's not a unique issue to a lot of tribal programs, especially tribal programs that might not have a lot of funds available from their tribe to utilize. And so our program is 100% grant funded, but we, through our strategic planning efforts and relationships with our school board and with our tribal council, we're hoping to secure sustainable long-term funding so that we are not reliant on grants. So if anybody has written grants or utilizes grants in their programs, you know that those are not guaranteed and they're limited. And it's not a sustainable way to maintain a long-term program such as a Languageness, where we're looking at having this program, perpetual within our community. So funding is always a major issue that we are working towards right now. Teacher training is also a challenge, as Yegunsi mentioned early in the presentation. We don't have a lot of first language speakers or second language speakers to utilize as resources within our community. So we're kind of having to do a dual training where people are learning both the language and the immersion teaching at the same time, and trying to keep one step ahead of the students because they learn very quickly. So we're trying to keep our teachers at least far enough in their proficiency that the students are not outgrowing our teachers with their language usage. But that's always been an issue for this community, especially in the last couple of decades, with a lot of our first language speaking elders passing on. And not a lot of second language speakers to pull from. We do have a lot of efforts happening, as mentioned before, but it's a unique type of situation for a program like ours, in that you have to be able to be interested and want to learn Oneida language, but I also want to teach young children. And sometimes it's difficult to find people who want to do both. And generally in the country, the teaching profession, there's a lot of shortages generally. And then where we have such a narrow focus here that it can be twice as hard or 3 times as hard sometimes to find teachers. But I think we're doing pretty well. We've got a few interested young people that want to teach in our nest long term. So that is something that we're working towards. We're getting them into the program. We're teaching them, and hopefully as our program grows, we'll have the staff to grow with us. The stereotypes around immersion or language learning generally can be somewhat of a difficulty sometimes, especially in communities where language isn't spoken every day, where we don't hear it all the time, where there is very little speakership happening within the community. And this is not unlike a challenge for other communities as well. If you read about, when they're starting Punana Leo in Hawaii, there's a lot of misconceptions about what immersion is. There's a lot of stereotypes that immersion, if you're in an immersion program, you won't learn to read, you won't learn to write, you won't be able to function in the Western society, in the world around you. But as these long-term immersion programs in Hawaii and Mohawk communities and in New Zealand have shown that actually it's quite the opposite. And in fact, children who are in immersion programs tend to do better on exams, tend to fare better in life overall as they age. But because our program is so new and this is not something our community has had before, it can be a challenge to overcome those stereotypes and get parents and community to understand the benefits of immersion and the long-term outcomes of immersion programming. Within each state, there's also different educational standards that they have, especially if you are within a BIE funded school and you have to follow those standards as well. It can be a bit of a challenge working within those systems to implement curricula and programming that is culturally based and culturally relevant. So trying to work within a system that doesn't always support immersion programming can be challenging. So this is one reason that it's very, very important to have support from, if you're in a school system, support from your administration to help you navigate those systems. English dominance, as always, is going to be another challenge. When students are not in the immersion program, they hear English on the TV, on the radio, at home, everywhere. English is the dominant language. So sometimes it can be a little bit of a challenge, or a lot of a challenge to really combat that English dominance, which is why it's really important that we have students enrolling in our program that are young, 3 and 4. That way, their minds are still like sponges, and we can really influence how language is learned for them, how languages work, the language that they hear, so that as they grow within the program, they're sort of primed for those higher sort of proficiency levels and things like that. So working around, of course, English dominance is always going to be a challenge for any Indigenous language. Like I mentioned before, we do have strategic planning that we do for our program because we're always thinking long-term. We're always thinking at least 5 years out, if not longer, in how our program is going to grow, and then the mechanisms we need to put in place now in order to reach those points. If you've ever done programming before, it's always a good idea to think always out, because especially working within a tribal system or a governmental system, processes can be very slow. So we need to make sure we account for all of the things we need to do in all different areas of our program, from language to teachers to administration issues, location, funding, all those sorts of things have to be taken into consideration when we're thinking about our future. So this is just a list of some of the things that we're working towards in our strategic planning. Creating an outdoor learning space that teachers can utilize during the school day at all times of the year. It's really important for our students to be out in nature and outside and experiencing all those things. It's very important culturally that they're outside during different times of the year, doing the types of things we would have done, planting, harvesting, all those sorts of things. So getting our students outside. An outdoor learning space, we're hoping, can also be a gathering space for our families and community to come together in a place where it is safe to use language, where language is heard and freely spoken. So we're hoping to kind of get that going, hopefully this summer. Developing and continuing to refine our proficiency assessments. As mentioned previously, we're still new, so we're still really finding what fits best for our students and our families. So continuing to see what is out there, what is already in use, and then taking what works for us, modifying it until we really come to that really strong proficiency assessment that's really going to help show the need, what's working, what's not working, and how we can use those assessments to further our programming. We also want to continue our partnership with the high school. Like I mentioned, it's almost like a teacher feeder program where we're getting interested students in, and hopefully they then go on either to continue the program or go on to college or whatever it may be. But always have that tie to our program and hopefully come back and want to teach and to grow with our program as well. A really important thing that we're looking at that's pretty far out is expanding our nest every other year. So like Yegunsi mentioned, we currently have 2 classrooms, not next school year, but the following school year is when we will add our 3rd classroom, and then every other year from there until I think 2033 might be when we are thinking our 12th, 11th, 12th grade classroom will be in place. So we do plan to expand our nest through 12th grade, and maybe at some point within there, a infancy or daycare type program as well. So we can have students birth to high school go through our program. So the expansion of the nest is really one thing that keeps us on our toes, because we're always like, we got one more year before we got another classroom coming. What do we got to do now? What do we got to train people on? Who do we got to get in? What do we got to do administratively to get ready for that? So we're always looking out ahead to those additional classrooms, because we want to always provide the best services for our parents and our students. And so we kind of have to make sure we're planning out so that our programming is solid and students are well taken care of, and they can learn and grow within the program. The in-house instructor training program is also really important, like we've talked about quite a bit. Immersion teaching is a unique skill. It's not something you can go to college and get a degree in. It's really something you have to learn hands-on in the classroom, because it takes a really unique skill and level of training in order to do immersion training or immersion teaching. So we want to make sure that while we're also creating speakers, we also want to create adequate teachers that can jump in and run classes or things like that for our students. We also want to continually share our resources. So like I mentioned, community awareness of our programming and immersion benefits is really important for us. And one way we like to get the community involved and aware of what's going on is by sharing all of our resources. So we don't hoard our resources, or they're not exclusive to our program. If anybody is interested in the materials that are used, or the resources that are created, whether that be posters or children's books or whatever it might be, we're always giving that away and sharing that with our community. Because if even one person takes that materials and sparks an interest and then wants to learn on their own, that's one more person who might become a speaker down the road. So it's all good all the way around. And then of course, always working towards finding sustainable funding for our program so that we are continually able to provide immersion to our community and to our young people. Just a few more future plans, always working to indigenize our program with our curricula, our policy, all the things that we're doing. Right now, we're working on several curricula to be used within our program that focus on our ceremonial and our seasonal calendars, that focus on kinship and teaching our young students not only like who they're related to, but what does that mean? What does family mean? What are those relationships mean? Because those are going to be really important values as they grow through our program and later, much later into adulthood. It's really important to instill these cultural values now and continue to grow their understanding of those values and their responsibility with those values as they grow. So that's just one area where we're working towards right now. But as always, everything that we're doing, we're taking, how can we make this an oniticize it, I guess you could say. How can we take this and add in cultural pieces? How can we modify whatever it might be? We're always looking for things to bring into the program and to make them our own. Like I just mentioned, the holistic curriculum, that's just one part of our curriculum. We have other things we're working towards as well. But really trying to instill in our students values, cultural teachings. Ungwehue Haudenosaunee people are an agricultural people, and a lot of our teachings and ceremonies revolve around that agricultural cycle. So a lot of our ceremonies, for instance, are about planting and harvesting and what's going on in the natural world during that time of the year. So we definitely want to make our program revolve around that as well. This is the first year that De Hariwanakwa will go in through the summertime so that we can have our students in June and July, which is right heavy during our planting and growing season, so that we don't miss out on that opportunity with our students. So we're always looking for ways to expand our program to make it much more culturally relevant. And again, as always, revitalizing our language is the ultimate goal so that it's normalized and it's being spoken within our community, not just by our students and families, but other Oneida people in our community as well.
All right, so I'll talk about some immersion teaching tools and techniques. I've been an instructor with the program since we first began when we had one instructor. So that was me. And so now we have 6 instructors, which is great. As our program expands, we're working on training more teachers. And so kind of as the first teacher within the program, I've learned a lot of things along the way. We've learned through doing, for sure. We've learned a lot of lessons, but a lot of really helpful things that I'll share here. But part of my job is to also train the other staff. So I work with training the new trainees that are brand new to immersion and the language, but I also work on training our classroom staff in both immersion techniques and language proficiency. So a few tools and tricks, techniques, whatever you want to call them. Staying in the language is key for immersion. That is, I guess if there's one rule, it's just in the language. So you have to be really creative. You generally have to think on your feet really fast, using what you know. Sometimes you might want to say a certain thing, but you might have skills a little differently. So you might have to reword how you say something to get a point across, depending on what you're saying. I always remember the big 2 in teaching through immersion. One is like using pictures, graphics, and drawings. 2 is actions and body movements. So when you're using a language, how are we getting kids to know what we're saying? Well, it's through pictures, graphics, or drawings, and actions and body movements. So a good example is, obviously we're with them all day long. So bathroom breaks are constant throughout the day. This is just like the first example that came to mind. So, but anyway, so asking them, do you need to use the bathroom? If I just ask someone that straight up, they might not understand if they've never heard it first, but if I say it and I point to a picture, we have a little picture of a bathroom on the wall in the classroom, and I'll say like, Isaga sanistrag or Isaga satste ganuska yandak, and I'll point to it, and then they'll associate what I'm saying with the picture, and that's how they're building the comprehension. So that's one way to do it. But also actions and body movements. If I need them to do something, like if I ask them to sit down, I could just say study is sit, but I would actually do it. I would sit down myself, and I might like pat the spot next to me and tell them study, like sit down. So that's that action or body movement. I might also gesture them. You can see me using my hands too. Even if I'm talking English, I'll do it too, just because like we do it all the time in the classroom. So but you can tell like you're providing that extra comprehension and emphasis on what you're talking about. So that those big 2, those teaching techniques, those are really important for building comprehension, staying in the language through immersion. Like I mentioned, actions, gestures, and facial expressions, they kind of fall under those actions and body movements, especially if you're talking about emotions. I work with 3 and 4-year-olds, and emotions is huge in that age group, in that area of development for them. And so, you know, their emotions, they're learning how to self-regulate at that age and manage their emotions. So it's really important that they know like certain ones, but it's important that I model them. Satsunoniga, are you happy? Sanakwalga, are you mad? You know, like, and so you can see me doing those same expressions to help them build that comprehension. Context and activities are also really helpful for helping students learn through immersion, increase their comprehension of what's going on through the use of the language. So for example, mealtime, that they're learning certain words that are used during that time, like eating, drinking, whatever, during that like specific activity. They learn by doing, but they're associating those specific words with that activity. So those I would say are kind of some of the general things that we've learned along the way that have worked really well for us, and that others can use also within their own communities. So a few other things, some other helpful techniques, aspects. Repetition and routine are really key to immersion. We have a general flow through our day, or a general rhythm. You could say a routine too, but students know like what we do. We always do our opening. We give thanks to Sungwaiti, the creator, first, and then we have breakfast, and then we go outside. And so there's like a real general flow or routine that we have throughout our day, but students know what to expect. So it's a little easier for them to go about their day, especially our really little ones, but also they can associate those specific words that we're using with each activity throughout the day as well. So those are really helpful just to keep those in mind. Patience is key in immersion, as well as persistence, because sometimes when you're in the moment doing something and you're asking them to do something, especially if it's right at the beginning of the year and they might not get it, you might have to do it 2 or 3 times and they still might not get it. That's totally okay, because they will eventually get it. And even if you use your body movements, your graphics, sometimes it takes a few days, sometimes it takes a few weeks, but in retrospect, it is very fast. Usually it's like a few days, if anything. But as the teacher or teaching through immersion, you really have to have a lot of patience, but continue to just using the language to teach, to speak, and to communicate with students, above all else. Less is more generally. Through our programming, our lessons, our activities, everything that we do with our students, less is more. We see that a lot of students are more creative when we have more simplistic approaches to how we're teaching them and what we're teaching them. So like, even if it's just, sometimes if we're doing like a group activity with Play-Doh, we might just give them Play-Doh, but they're going to create all these different things instead of giving them like maybe all these other little like cutouts and things like that, which we do too. It depends on the activity, but they can have more of imagination. So we found that like less is more, especially with our lessons and our activities and teaching students. Simplicity is best. It allows them to be more creative and use their imaginations. Planning is really critical for teaching in immersion. You have to continuously plan not only lessons and activities, but the words that you're using during those new lessons and activities. For us, usually that stuff is brand new to us as teachers too. So we have to consistently and constantly study new words and improve our own language proficiency like regularly, all the time. Sometimes we have the dictionary out or notes like with us as we're doing the lesson and activity, and that's okay too. In our classroom, we have a lot of whiteboards with like key phrases for various activities, especially for new staff. That tends to help, so they know, okay, these are mealtime words. Then you can just kind of see them. We've also used, we've made like little charts and lists, and we put them on our lanyards, and sometimes new staff or teachers will use that to help them like reference certain words that they may need throughout the day. So, but anyway, that was a little bit of a tangent on that point. Planning is critical. Knowing what you're going to do as the teacher, you're kind of the leader for the classroom in guiding and directing students in their learning. So that's just a really helpful aspect to teaching. So as you can probably tell by the way I'm presenting, high energy and a positive outlook is, it definitely makes all the difference. So it makes things exciting. So it's just ironic, I guess, that I added that point on there, but it really is really helpful, especially with my age group of students, especially if maybe they're having a little bit of an emotional moment. Our just general human nature is like, oh, we don't want to deal with this. But usually if you just put that little extra effort or energy or a smile, you can, and still doing it in the language, you can help them with whatever they need. So it's definitely really helpful, especially in immersion teaching and in immersion education, growth mindset, knowing that the possibilities are endless and that our growth is limitless. We will achieve whatever we put our minds to. And so that's kind of one of the main things. That's a common value we have among all of our teachers here, is that, learning our language, we can do that. Learning these new words, we can do that. We can teach through our language in a brand new lesson that we maybe didn't know last week. So growth mindset, very helpful. Similar to this next one, language development is continuous. It is lifelong. Whether you're teaching an immersion or a second language environment, it really does. It's a lifelong commitment, but you're a lifelong learner. That's what I consider myself. I'm a lifelong learner of the language. Even if you think about us as English speakers, you know, we don't know every word in English, but we learn them throughout our entire lives. It's the same thing. And also, too, I'll just add another point is as you're learning language, learning and teaching are kind of simultaneous roles sometimes, but to just be gentle with yourself. And us here, you know, we make mistakes all the time. There's not a day that goes by that I don't make a mistake in my speech, but I'm gentle with myself and kind to myself. Humor goes a long way. Laughter is medicine. And usually the kids will start correcting me. So I'm like, all right, I know that they know what we're doing, because if they know this, you know, that's a good sign. But it really is, you just have to kind of be kind to yourself. So that's just another helpful thing in this work, because sometimes there definitely is, our language loss has obviously created a lot of barriers and trauma for learning language in our community, but it's important that we kind of start shifting that conversation, because we really want to overcome that barrier, not only within our community, but across Turtle Island within all of our communities. And so just practicing some of those more positive areas will start to help to kind of shift that mindset of, you know, using humor and laughter and, kindness and peace to yourself as a teacher and a learner throughout your journey. So anyway, back to the presentation. Practicing critical reflection as teachers, we're always assessing how a lesson or an activity went with students and ways that we can make it better. That's really important. Even I compare lessons I did the previous year. What can I do better? That's just a really important part of that growth mindset, but really being a better teacher. If you recall, if you think back to all the teachers you had in your life, the teachers that, you know, didn't really practice growth mindset, you know, they're probably pretty stagnant. Maybe not the most enjoyable experience, but those that were mindful of making changes, trying new things, you know, those are some of the most memorable experiences, but those are enjoyable, but also impactful. So those are kind of some of the areas that I just wanted to touch on really quick about just practicing critical reflection. So, and I think this might be the last one. Remembering your why above anything else, teaching and learning as a teacher. I always tell this to our staff here, remember your personal why. Even though this is our jobs, this is also, we're all Oneida, we're all Indigenous. And so we have a personal connection to this work as well. We have, you know, many hats we wear as one person, or many roles that we have as one person, or many people. And so remembering your why, what is your why as a community, but as a why for yourself. So the title of this presentation is Language is Medicine. Language is medicine. It can be used to heal our communities, combat a lot of those issues associated with language loss and historical trauma. And so that's really important stuff here. That keeps you driving and keeps you going in language immersion, because sometimes, yes, it may sound intimidating, it might sound scary, but it's worth it. So identify your why, write it down if you would like, carry it with you, keep it with you, and it may change over time. That is okay. But that's all really important. I always tell the staff, we revisit this every once in a while. We sometimes have to take a step back, remind ourselves of these, and it keeps us going, it keeps us moving, and it makes all the difference. And really, like I mentioned, sometimes it feels like immersion might be scary, especially if it's new to you, or if you might not know about it. And sometimes it might seem like, oh my gosh, that might seem like such hard work. And I never say it's hard work. I always say it's heart work, because that's where it comes from. It comes from within. So I always tell at least our staff here that this is heart work. This is like coming from within. We have all of our ancestors around us at all times, helping us, working with us. And so just keeping those things in mind just helps you along the journey. So be kind and loving to yourself in the process, embrace mistakes, collaborate with others, and don't forget to smile and laugh. So this is our why. These are our students. Ungwe Hue Ni'i means I am Oneida. So these are, this is a little old of a picture, but this is our oldest group now in the oldest classroom. This is when they were in my classroom, in the young one. So, but definitely it's the kids. They are one of our biggest whys. So, yeah. And there's some information too. We have a YouTube page. So if you Google Dehadiwanakwa Languageness, we have a variety of parent language learning videos, adult language lessons, some immersion videos and lessons, stories. We have a Facebook page with various resources and things like that. And then our Oneida Language Department also has their Facebook page link on there as well.
Sorry about that. I was on mute. Awesome. You can find those links in the file section of this session. You can go ahead and take a look. And we do have a couple of questions that I wanted to sort of pose. We're getting some amazing response. Awesome presentation. I love this presentation. I'm learning so much. I'm sure you can see the strategies that they're sharing are great for immersion, but it can also be used in your language classrooms. Maybe you're not doing immersion. You can still use a lot of the strategies. Let's see. Let me read through some of these questions. Okay. Does your program have a specific instructional curriculum for your teachers in training? If so, what does that consist of, and is that available to see somewhere?
Absolutely, yes. So we do have a main instructional curriculum that we use for teaching our teachers. The language department, which is the department that the Languageness is run through, we have a second language learning curriculum, and it breaks down our language to its most simplest parts, including pronouns, our verb categories, which we call stems. It includes verb conjugations, and we have 4 sets of curriculum that we use to teach second language learners, adults, but we use them for our teachers too. And so those curriculums really give a strong foundational base for teachers, because once you get into immersion, you have to know those things. You have to know all the basics. You have to know the pronoun patterning system. You have to know how to conjugate verbs, because it's just like the next step above your language acquisition, because now you're using it, you're acquiring new vocabulary in the classroom. And so that's the main curriculum we use. We do have those, let's see, we have I do have those documents that I could send. I'm not sure, they might be on the Facebook page too. I'll have to check. But if you look at our YouTube page, there's parent and adult lessons. All of those parent and adult lessons are mini lessons that are taken directly from that curriculum. So you can actually watch those videos and those follow along with all the basics of learning Oneida. So
nice. Thanks for those resources. There is another question about, the kiddos will eventually reach the fluency of the teacher. How do you mitigate keeping teachers' fluency growing?
Through a lot of constant studying. We have there's a few things we do. We have professional development staff training days that we set aside for teachers that helps to train them on both cultural practices, cultural arts, but also we set aside time for language learning or studying language development. We collaborate a lot as teachers. And so a lot of times if like a word comes up or something we might not know, we'll ask each other. We have like a really large group chat. So we're always asking each other questions in the group chat or sending each other words that might be relevant for the day or the lesson or whatever is going on. Through our collaboration, I guess that really helps us. Sometimes we literally are a day ahead of the students, but that's kind of common in immersion just because the state of our languages, obviously we don't have any speakers. The teachers, I mean, they have to be the speakers for the students. So like I mentioned, like sometimes we literally have the dictionary out, like when we're doing the lesson, just because I need to see like examples so I'll just quickly reference them and I know how to make the change. So I just go ahead and do it as I'm speaking it. And sometimes that is the case. Hopefully over time, And the more, like, this is my 4th year now, so compared to my first year, I've definitely come a long way in my own personal proficiency, but we kind of anticipate the same thing for the rest of the staff. The more experience they have, the more easier using the language will be for them. But obviously their proficiency will continue to grow. So
Great. Thank you. Thank you for asking that. It looks like that's all of our questions. Again, a lot of really positive responses. Um, let's see, wait. Is native literacy development part of your program or not so much as oral language development?
it's a little bit of both. We are a new program right now. Our main approach right now is oral development, oral literacy, I guess. We are new, but our language is also based orally. And so that's kind of one thing we're mindful of. We are, as we're growing, we're slowly developing like where we're going, where the students are going in terms of their own learning. But kind of one of the things that we've done thus far is trying to be mindful in aligning the cultural history or our language as an oral language, in doing the same development and administering that, evaluating that in our program right now through the instruction. There's one other thing I was going to say about that. The other thing too is in terms of literacy development, we've done a little research with that so far. We've noticed that pretty much every other country besides the United States doesn't actually start that until later, and that they actually see better benefits to, I guess you could say, delaying literacy education in terms of the students' overall like academic success and achievement. So did you want to mention something?
Yeah, my daughter's in the K1 room right now, and they do learn or see the letters in the Oneida language. So they will see the letters and do like sound practices. And when the teachers are doing different lessons on the whiteboard, they will write sometimes in the Oneida language. So the students are seeing written form of the Oneida language. And so then they begin associating those sounds with those letters and how that's and kind of getting that word letter sort of sound association that they would normally kind of be doing in kindergarten anyway, where they're associating different English, but I don't know, I'm not an English teacher, where how they start forming words and learning what letters represent what sounds. They are doing that, but just with Oneida letters and the sounds that the letters make in the Oneida language. So they are getting that. And like Yegunsi mentioned, as our students get older into higher grades, there are models and resources out there that can help us shape that portion of our program. For instance, I know in the immersion programming in Maori communities, they do like they have immersion all the way through college, and there's individuals that are even writing essays and thesis papers in Maori language. In my own doctoral program, we had a gentleman come and present from a Maori community. I believe he worked in immersion programming. And when their students were like in high school age, they would have to write about a topic in their language. And then the teacher, then they would discuss it. Why did you phrase it this way? Why did you use this word or use this word, and kind of help the students develop a deeper understanding of the different ways their language can be used to describe things, because our Indigenous languages are so descriptive. So those are some things that we're keeping in the back of our minds so that we can pull from those resources as our students get to that point. But for right now, they are doing that, they are seeing the Oneida language written and then hearing it also at the same time.
Awesome. Great. Thanks. A wonderful presentation. Just a lot of really positive feedback in the chat. Really enjoying your idea about keeping humor and so that teachers don't become stressed or exhausted, and students as well. Oh well, shucks. We have about 4 more minutes before we get cut off. There was another question that just came in, that we could just maybe answer real super quick. Do the students continue on to English-based schools after the immersion school?
Right now, our program, we intend to permanently expand our program. So as our students age, we're adding new classrooms. So all of our students will continue to move into an older, higher grade classroom. And right now, we're training 2 new teachers to work in the new classroom that we add, not next year, but the following school year. So we're always like, the training for teachers starts like a couple years before they're actually in a classroom, like assigned to a classroom. So that's like the progression or the expansion of our program is following our students as they age. We're adding new classrooms to continue to advance their own education,
Yeah.
immersion education. So
So the plan is for them to stay with you and not go to any other school, right? Awesome. Okay, great. I really want to again thank our presenters for presenting today. Let me see if I can. There are their contact information. I know again in the files they've shared a whole bunch of resources. I want to thank our participants for being active in the chat, and we will end this session. Thank you again for joining. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
thank you.
Yeah.